Thank you for tuning into Advanced TV Herstory, where we strive to elevate the importance of TV women by telling their stories. We know how seeing ourselves on television impacts our own growth and confidence. There's gold and inspiration in the decades of great work by underappreciated, often forgotten, significant, talented women. Thanks for listening and sharing this podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Hello, listeners. You're all familiar with the phrase, "the devil is in the details"? Well, I'll tell you that telling the story of TV women is rewarding, particularly when it requires close examination of the details. Now, there's watching the show itself, any series that I've talked about, any series of series in some cases, where I'm talking about the legendary career of some talented woman behind the scenes or in front of the camera. And then there's all of the recounting controversy or the awards or the important turning points. And even seeing, with a 21st century feminist eye, a whole new angle, something that had never been picked up in or perhaps professed, that now you can read between the lines. I believe the role the Judy Garland show plays in TV herstory is that of a bridge. Week by week, it took the best of the past and put it forward with a 1963 sort of best we can do approach. And I'll explain. It leveraged Judy's star power, talent, and attractive weight, and appealed to Judy's generation and somewhat to those who grew up watching her movies or listening to her albums. The show was one of the most expensive and heralded series of its time, with a budget of $150,000 and more per episode, and so it had the potential to be high gloss, to fit Judy's worldwide stature. There is almost no parallel that we can find today to use here in 2019 to equate the significance of Judy Garland in 1963. You can't do justice to that sort of a setup. So understand that to some degree, the series succeeded. While it's true that the show's cancellation, of which Judy was only informed weeks before the final episode, was actually shot, it claimed to be due to poor ratings, there's a bit of an important context, like a big old asterisk in that poor ratings reason for cancellation. Listeners, I like to think of a quote that has been attributed to Texas's former governor, Ann Richards, rest her soul. And it applies here. When Ann said, "After all, Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did. She just did it backwards and in high heels." So, the details. In his book, The Judy Garland Show, Rainbow's End, noted Hollywood reporter, journalist, and author Coyne Sanders scrounged up every inch of communication, news clippings, interviews, and memos that document the chatter that preceded the show. Take a deep breath, listeners. Sanders' book, page 54, quote, "Whether Garland could succeed was one question raised early on by Variety magazine," to which Variety is quoted, "It's hardly betraying a secret that the multi-million-dollar investment in Judy Garland represents a calculated risk, since there's no guarantee of a full season lock-in of her services. Depending upon any number of reasons, Miss Garland, some feel, might suddenly decide to blow the whole thing." The caveat being that the contract was written as such that Judy could pull out of the contract before all 26 episodes had been produced and aired, whereas the network could not cancel her mid-season. That in and of itself is a bit of a power game. And was it put in to intimidate Judy? Okay. So Garland scholar and interpreter, performer, singer, huge Garland fan, Angela Ingersoll, who herself produces a concert entitled Get Happy and has done so around the country, you should see it, she put it kindly.
Part of it, you can get hints from in this idea of the schedule that when do you want a live audience to show up for this? She would make rather what they felt were strange demands because she performed at an extraordinarily high level. She was one-take Judy. She was a phenomenal artist, but getting out of her dressing room and onto the stage was always a challenge. Once she was there, she was perfection. But oftentimes it was hard to get out of the dressing room.
And that dogged
because of her
through her Hollywood career.
Because of her nerves, which largely stem from her drug addiction.
Yes. Which everybody in this room, in this studio, will also attribute. We would stand right next to Judy today, though she would be quite old, and we would say it really was MGM and it was the studio system. To add to the production pressure of this woman, who was carrying worldwide comeback momentum on her shoulders, yes, we want to have you. We want you to do a show. Wink. We don't think you will actually live up to it.
Succeed, right?
Wink. And we're going to stick you against a very long running, highly popular show. So if you're really up to it, Judy, go crazy.
There's an idea then that because I think some of these male executives who got roped into managing her show, I think they were so scared of dealing with her and her quote unquote demands, which were really just her being treated humanely and having some artistic integrity to the show that was of her liking, having some artistic control in the show. I think because they didn't want to deal with that and or were intimidated by that, it wasn't their fault if the show failed, if it's up against Bonanza, right?
Right.
They have a get out of jail free card.
And because
from having to deal with her.
And because she's, quote unquote, air quotes, listeners, difficult to work with.
Right.
Bonanza, right? It was an arbitrary decision to put her on Sunday nights. There was nothing set in stone that's when it had to be. Danny Kaye's show lagged Judy's with much less of an audience on Wednesday, but performed really well in its slot. That's how scheduling works. That's how the programmers determine how to leverage what they've got. CBS execs were adamant to slot her against Bonanza. Listeners, what you need to know is she was put up against Bonanza. So we've just talked a little bit about the fact that, Sunday night.
You probably remember, some of you, it was on Sunday nights at 9.
All of young America, half of America was under the age of 18 pretty much, or at least the ones who were watching TV. And of course, Bonanza is a big hit, and it's also filled with men. That and so it was a macho sort of family fare show, and they put. You got to wonder whether or not that was part of it.
You also had one TV in the household. If you were lucky, you had one TV in the household, and who was in charge of what channel was on? I'm sure it was Father was in charge, and Father was going to be perhaps more interested on watching Bonanza over on NBC, because these were stories that he could relate to more than an arts entertainment program, because we traditionally find that the ticket buying audience for art entertainment programs are largely women. So that's who they're marketed towards.
Given the demographic then of how TV was consumed and how decisions were made, I don't know that we have an equivalent today of a series that was as popular and influential and a time slot that was as family-oriented as Bonanza.
I certainly can't think... our entertainment nowadays is so very fragmented because there were 3 channels to tune into.
On one TV.
Right. The choices were limited. So one program could have a much greater influence. We don't have coffee talk kind of shows. We don't have water cooler type of shows now because our entertainment is segmented, because you can go in a million different directions to find what you want. There isn't a unifying force in entertainment any longer. We're all treated like demographics now, and the demographics keep getting more and more specialized. And it's harder to reach across an aisle and find one another now in our public discourse, partially because even in entertainment, we can't bond over who is the greatest American singer right now.
I mean, really, it was the 60s and everything was changing.
It's 1963 and she's singing songs written in 1918, and it just became incongruent at that time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we had JFK as our president. The baby boom stretches from 1946 to 1964. So we are heading into what is truly the phase of great change that we know of to be the 60s.
Right. The world was changing so quickly then for everyone.
And those young baby boomers, they were ready for their own sound. They were ready for their own look. And Judy, though, represented, I think, for the moms and the dads watching TV. That was the little slice of
the
middle age,
days.
right?
Yeah,
and,
she was the
and
good
who
old
they
days
grew up with.
And the Greatest Generation's Girl Next Door, you know, from all those great 1940s war propaganda movies and things like From Me and My Gal. Judy was a piece of yesteryear that did not fit in with how the world was changing. Judy wasn't cool, though she was fascinating and talented. And it seems like if her TV show would have hit just a little earlier, it could have had more success as a staple in the American home. But because we waited until 63 to even begin the process of filming, by this time, rock and roll is hitting. We see artists like Neil Sedaka losing their popularity because the Beatles are coming. So things that represented all of this feel-good, smiley, poppy American art are being replaced by the British invasion, by new sounds that are coming up from Black music, from Southern rock and roll, and from England, all saying it's time for a new sound, a louder sound. We want to be heard instead of being presented as American youth, a packaged, happy version of our entertainment.
The show was filmed at CBS Television Studios in California before a live audience. And it was decided early on to film the final dress rehearsal so they'd have more footage to work with as segments filmed live were edited for broadcast. The studio it was filmed in was tricked out in as many ways as possible. It had been a standing studio for a long time. So it was expanded as much as it could to hold a live audience and also create space for musicians and skits and backdrops and everything they needed. The simplicity, if you watch it on DVD or on YouTube, the simplicity is tied directly to the lack of space that would have accommodated more. That, and later on, Judy's better understanding of production costs. Lighting was state-of-the-art, as were the cameras used. Watch the YouTube clips and you will see the simplicity of Judy's storytelling in front of a trunk. Such a symbol of her storied career. This was a vestige, this was a salute to her early days in vaudeville, of literally how she claimed that her childhood, before she made it to MGM, was living in a trunk and performing on stages throughout the Midwest and California growing up with her vaudevillian parents. Buy the DVDs and be treated to orchestra preludes and that whole Las Vegas-style Judy in lights, big light bulbs, as well as the lights that outlined the stage. It was very classy. It was very Vegas Judy, Carnegie Judy, Palladium Judy. And I sometimes wonder whether or not in 1963 or 1964, my mother, who at that point may have been pregnant with me, had nothing to relate to this woman. She had nothing in common. Well, they did. They were both born in Minnesota and they both smoked cigarettes. And they both had 3 kids, or nearly. But however you watch the episodes, you can't help but notice 3 things when you're watching. And I would encourage you to watch the episodes. Judy's hair, which was closely managed by a longtime trusted hairdresser, Orval Payne, simply known as Orval. Judy's wardrobe, which was stunning, and her weight. Now, sadly, her weight comes up all too frequently in promotional articles and interviews throughout Judy's career. Do not get me started on that, but I think here we are with our 2019 lens on. And when you hear that, you immediately feel one more pang, one more sense that, yes, this was somebody who had to deal with this on literally a daily basis. Of course, it affected everything she did. So, but they did spend money on the set, and they spent money on her wardrobe.
All these production values. Her wardrobe. Oh, I love it. The poppy dress is maybe my favorite dress. There's so many wonderful Bob Mackie dresses, of course.
Yes. So, listeners, if you get a chance and you're watching episodes on YouTube, or you do the right thing, I would say, and talk with your family members about the Judy Garland show, and go ahead and buy those DVDs.
Yeah.
And then maybe buy a ticket to Angela's show here in the Chicagoland or throughout the United States to really relive and truly come to appreciate at a much higher level all of Judy's work. The wardrobe, though, is the wardrobe and her hair. They are works of art.
Yeah.
Works of American art. Designers that who made their name, or at least got the first initial exposure on national/worldwide TV because their gowns were on her very petite.
4'11" frame. And she got herself into television shape. Just a few years before this, about 4 years before this, 5 years before this, Judy was much heavier. At the end of the 50s,
185 pounds on 4'11", roughly.
She was normally at when you think of the Judy of the movies back in the 1940s, that's a 95-pound human being you're looking at, sometimes 90. And she got up to just under 200 pounds.
Although some of that was edema.
Health.
That was so her body was retaining fluids in places that it shouldn't, and so some of the hospitalization was to regulate her kidneys, regulate all of her processes, so that
and which largely, the not so secret is that is all because of the drugs that were trying to shove themselves through her tiny system, and the body handling what it could handle, and so there was a time of a strong health scare.
So you have names like Bob Mackie, who ultimately got the national and international exposure by draping her very svelte, hard-worked, hard-earned frame back.
She said she fasted to get that frame. She said nothing but tea for about 2 weeks, and then the weight never came back. She said, I just evened out my metabolism. Oh. Now that's...
She's a raconteur.
Yeah. Those are all a lot of fancy words.
And so, listeners, if you aren't necessarily up on your 60s and 70s variety show wardrobe designer, big designers like the ones who graced every single Rona Barrett and every single movie magazine that happened from the 60s to the 70s, Bob Mackie outfitted Carol Burnett for most of her series, and she was on forever. He was influential in the Cher show. All of those enigmatic,
so exciting
Cher dresses that she wore to the Oscars and the Grammys and everywhere else. If Cher was a knockout, it was because of Bob Mackie.
Yeah,
and
gotta start with Judy.
And he
does some dressing of Liza later too, as well in the 80s. Yeah.
He is a cultural icon, but there's no question that in 1962 and 63, he was getting brought up as, in a sense, an apprentice to who was the lead designer. And so that's kind of fascinating. And that, again, is one more nugget that makes you really appreciate the innovation that was coming up out of this show that could not otherwise have replicated any existing variety show. It was so different from the Danny Kaye show. It was, and yet it was fumbling because there was never really anybody who was willing to just decide on a single format.
There was nobody quite brave enough to take the reins of this big machine. There was nobody that could stand up to Judy, and yet there was also no one who would give Judy the authority to just be the one in charge. So there was really just not a captain to this ship. But unfortunately, they went through many different directors. They went through many different writers trying to find a fit.
Lack of direction. Seems crazy, doesn't it? Money wasn't a problem. Talent was in spades. Just nobody to channel the tremendous force that was Judy toward a consistent weekly show. In an Emmy TV Legends interview, legendary designer Bob Mackie, he is one of the very few costume designers who is known by name, shared some of his memories from the show.
It was just, the whole thing was just a little weird. But it was, like I said, I met and got to know more people on that show than ever before. But Judy herself was an interesting woman. I used to go to her house on Sunday nights. She'd invite people from the show that she liked and whatever, and watch the show with her. And she really had a good time watching herself. She liked that. And she was funny and entertaining and all those things. But then the next day she might, slash her wrist or something. Who knows? It was sort of horrifying. And I knew her, but I wasn't that close. Ray, who I was working with, he got to be much closer with her, and he would get the calls in the middle of the night. And that's very hard. You shouldn't, I don't believe you should ever get that close to somebody that you're working with. I think, you become friends, but you shouldn't be their best friend that could call you in the middle of the night to take you to the hospital and things like that. But I learned a lot watching her, and I learned a lot about the people that were there. Some of the most memorable times were when she had someone on the show that were good competition. Then she would come up to it. She would absolutely perform like nobody. You couldn't believe it. If Lena Horne was on the show, or Peggy Lee was on the show, or Barbra Streisand, real competition when Barbra Streisand was on the show. And then to be standing there and seeing Barbara, who you knew at that moment was going to be this huge star, and Judy Garland, who had been and still was, and then there was Ethel Merman, who was the diva of Broadway, and they were all on stage at the same time. It was like unbelievable. And then there was another time when John Kennedy had been assassinated, and he was a friend of hers. I mean, she was calling him on the phone, saying happy birthday on his birthday and things like that. And she was devastated. We had a show that we canceled the show. And the next week she came on and sang Battle Hymn of the Republic, which, and the audience just stood up and screamed. I mean, it was really very emotional. And I'm thinking, I'm standing there watching this, thinking, my God, this is really something. So there were those moments, even though the show was never a hit, it was critically quite a hit in many ways. But it was opposite Bonanza. So we know what the greater unwashed America wanted to watch. I was trying to think what we did for her. Most of the time she wore evening gowns or pantsuits. But the lady, never had any money. She never had anything. I mean, she made a lot of money, but she never had anything to wear. She was going to New York, and I remember at one point, Ray says, she hasn't got anything to wear. I says, well, why don't we make her some beautiful little coats and suits and have her, and talk to the art director, who was Bob Kelly, wonderful art, Bob Kelly, and do a street scene and let her, make her some suits, make her some coats and things that she can travel in and go to New York. And so for a while we were doing little suits with fur trim and little hats, and she would do the number in that. And then she'd also have evening gowns. But we were like trying to, boost up her wardrobe a little bit. She had a very odd figure. It would be almost impossible for her to go buy clothes in the store. She was only 4'11", which was amazingly short, and was high heels and long legs for her height, and a very short body, full-breasted. And so it was hard to dress her. I mean, you could never buy clothes that would really look great on her.
If you watch the FX network series Feud, the Bette Davis and Joan Crawford making of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, you get a true understanding of how women in their 40s, with experience and confidence from the silver screen, were perceived, or how they were perceived in the realm of TV. In other parts of this podcast series, we talk about the ageism that Judy faced, relying on self-deprecation to take the edge off her power, to make her seem perhaps more approachable. If she calls herself an old lady, well then, we can all laugh at her. Oh, this cuts me to the core. So you'll find another episode of Advanced TV Herstory that deals with TV's ageism during these years, and it's Joan Crawford's TV Twilight career. Find the link in the show notes. Angela and I covered this a bit. She showed up, she delivered, she had an opinion about...
She always had an opinion.
Lighting and staging and musical selection.
And a lot of time that was enough to make her a problem child.
Yes, difficult to work with.
Had vision. Mm-hmm. She had vision. She was a very good artist. She would say, no, I don't like that. Mm-hmm. And that was unheard of.
And she knew the back end of the business. She knew the back end of production because she'd been doing this since...
She was so often right, about these things too. She was a very, very savvy artist and entertainer. I mean, she'd been doing it since she was 2 years old. There were occasionally male artists who would listen to her and found that Judy's way was the right way. For example, during the filming of Meet Me in St. Louis, directed by Vincent Minnelli, who became her husband, she did not want to sing Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Didn't like the lyrics. Said this, they're going to make me look like a monster. Don't make me sing this to the child. Because the original lyric went something like, have yourself a merry little Christmas. It might be your last. That was the first line of the song. She said, I'm not going to sing this. Demanded rewrites until the song became really, really beautiful and something she could believe in. She kept saying no until it became the great piece of art we know it to be today. So for those gentlemen who were willing to collaborate with Judy's instincts, great things happened. That movie and that song are certainly so woven into American fabric. And therefore, she has a a part of that creation by her quote-unquote stubbornness. She was simply somebody who deserved to be part of the process. That's all she felt.
She did. She deserved to be the woman at the table with perhaps more experience in delivering the artistic product as well as conceiving it than most of those men did. So listeners, I get very sad when I start thinking about how a lack of leadership and a lack of buy-in, a lack of investment, emotional investment from CBS ultimately resulted in what could be considered the strongest fixable line of the failure of the series. Because really, which came first, Judy's unraveling or the roller coaster of production? Somebody needed to be in charge. Here was this star talent singing while wearing a football helmet with a dozen teenage boys wearing uniforms singing Win Win Saki, which was na-na-na-na-na-na, and it's kind of a corny football song. It was a random, poor quality sketch, sort of. It was kind of a lead-in that any legitimate performer surely would have bristled at, but it was kind of cornball CBS. Even the Carol Burnett show would never have allowed that. But there it was, 2 minutes and 10 seconds as an opener. And I'm sure that the CBS execs were telling her that this bit, wink, wink, would keep audiences tuned to CBS and not switch over to Bonanza. Football. Yeah, that'll do it. What a loss. So all of her confidence, all of her skill that represented a lifetime of work, she deserved so much more from CBS and show business than she received. And in 2019, we as women perhaps finally understand how these pieces fit together. So it's never been more important to tell our stories, to celebrate our raconteurs, to be the smartest women in the room, show up, and deliver. Here's a fun outtake from Judy that demonstrates really her love of entertainment.
That was the first time I ever sold a million copies, and I've been recording since they had cylinder records, or a speaker and a dog. But I got a real gold record for that one. And we did those concerts all over the country. We did 48 of them, actually. And one of them was at the Hollywood Bowl here in Hollywood. And everything was fine except that it's outside, you see, and it was a rotten night, terrible night. And I had particularly asked them to build a runway over this great big pool of water that, the audience, is separated by the artist by this vast ocean. So they built a runway without any bulbs on it. Just to confuse me. And it started to rain at the beginning of the overture. And I thought, well, what the heck, But I had to come out with a hand mic like this. And there was about 108 feet of cord in back of me. And just as they finished the overture and I started to come on, the stage manager stopped me and said, "Now, don't let any of that cord get in the water or you'll be electrocuted." So I went on and I did the dodgiest performance you've ever seen here, and I wrapped the cord around and I said, because I was going to be shorting off.
Listeners, this has been a great topic to transition to a season format. Judy Garland, there's just so much to think about. The decision to go in this direction is largely due to the enormous feedback I received from you, saying that what makes Advanced TV Herstory so distinct from other podcasts are the moments when we take a close view of TV Herstory and then see how it connects to today. That's the blend of sociology, gender studies, history, and business that few other podcasts offer. So no matter how you came to listen to this episode or any of the past episodes, know that you can find us other places as well. We try hard to make our work available for convenient listening, and we'd be incredibly grateful if you'd take a few minutes to share this show with someone who might enjoy this fresh take on Judy Garland. Even more so if, in sharing this podcast, you open the whole door to podcasts, which really are just audio programs, like listening to the radio, sort of, to someone who otherwise finds the idea of listening to a podcast to be complicated, downright intimidating. Help that person. As a matter of fact, just say to them, find the Just Press Play button of Advanced TV Herstory at the tvherstory.com website. Or go to Pandora and search Advanced TV Herstory. We're even on YouTube. On social media, you can find us. Our Twitter handle is TV Herstory, and on Instagram, Advanced TV Herstory. And as always, our email is advancedtvherstory@gmail.com. For this important season on Judy's show, The 60s Judy, we owe a great thank you to Angela Ingersoll. She brings her love and knowledge of Judy everywhere, including our studio here in Chicago. Such tremendous energy and heart. We wish her the very best as her show, Get Happy, builds its audience, travels the country, and we really hope to have her back here at Advanced TV Herstory for more fun. If you want to know more about the Judy Garland Show, the series, I highly recommend Coyne Stephen Sanders' book, The Judy Garland Show, Rainbow's End. I've quoted Sanders' research and direct quotes from that book, though all those interviews that are now going on 30 years of age. Wow. We're coming up on the anniversary of The Wizard of Oz and of Judy Garland's series. A lot of really great stuff out there. Okay, as we leave and finish this episode of Advanced TV Herstory's look at the Judy Garland Show, I have to, of course, give credit behind the scenes to two people who make this show what it is. Jen Eads of Brassy Broadcasting, who serves as audio editor, and Catherine Yang, who is associate producer and video director. Very talented, true believers in the work we're doing. And that background music, that's Jazzer's Take Me Higher, which you can find at freemusicarchive.com. I leave you with this. In 1963, Judy Garland said in an interview, "You really want to know why I'm tackling a weekly television series? Because CBS is letting me be myself, letting me be a whole, total, complete person." Listeners, be yourself. Be whole. Give it your all. Thanks for listening, and thank you for recommending us to others. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.